But with all this going on in Washington, what impact does it have on Arkansas? The electorate here, the voters, the politicians here, and campaigns coming up in 2014. And to answer that, go straight to the source. We have the interim director of the Arkansas Democratic Party, Candace Martin, in studio. Candace, good morning.
It's good to be on, Alice.
I'm glad you could be here. And with the Republican Party of Arkansas, Spokesman David Ray. David, good morning.
Good morning, Alice. Glad to be here.
Well, I'm sure you guys have been keeping a close eye on D.C., and it does. It will have an impact on here in Arkansas, with the 18 months away from the next elections. But Candace, we'll start with you. The number one person or election you would think that would be impacted by this would be the Senate race involving Mark Pryor. How do you see that, or do you see it having an impact?
Well, I think a lot of people listening out there today would say that they would agree that there are problems with the way that things are done in Washington. And certainly I would, point to the IRS scandal. Even, President Obama said yesterday that this was unacceptable, that the people that were responsible for it need to be brought to justice, and that the American people, they expect for our government agencies to act in a nonpartisan way, and that's the way that should be done. We saw the resignation of the IRS director, which is, a good step in the right direction. But of course, there's still questions to be had there. And, concerning with U.S. Senator Mark Pryor, I would also just say, look at the things that he is focused on. And, we all can agree that there are problems with Washington, but we need to focus on what needs to be worked on here at home and here in Arkansas. And that's exactly what Senator Pryor is doing. Just this week, he held a town hall on agriculture issues, which is very important to the state, particularly during this time of year. It's one of the largest industries, and we need to make sure that it's an economic driver and continues to be for our state. And showing that that is one of the things that he is fighting for is just another reason why he's a wonderful U.S. Senator and a good advocate for Arkansas.
David, your thoughts on how this will affect Senator Pryor and his race?
Sure. Well, first of all, these are not just minor scandals here. We're just barely scratching the surface of what's gone on in Washington and what we're going to see going forward. I mean, we're talking about things here that represent an enormous breach of the public trust. And when you talk about the political thuggery that we're seeing in the IRS, and they're using the tax code in an attempt to silence and intimidate political opponents, is appalling, and not enough is being done about it, and we still need more answers. Now, there's no doubt that this is going to have an impact on the 2014 races, and it's going to impact every Democrat, in my opinion, insofar as it continues to fuel voters' discontent with the Obama administration. It's going to continue to raise questions about their ability to govern. CBS was saying just the other day that Obama doesn't have control of his own government. So those are the type of things that we're seeing. And there's a reason that it took Mark Pryor over 120 hours to come out and say something about this IRS scandal. Senate Democrats, both in 2010 and in 2012, were calling on the IRS to do these kind of things. Essentially, they were calling on the IRS to investigate the tax-exempt political organizations, and even in 2012, even Senator Schumer, who I might add is one of the largest contributors to Mark Pryor's reelection, even went as far as threatening legislative action against the IRS if they failed to look into these kind of things. So it's really no stretch to say that Senate Democrats in Washington have really assisted in creating a climate that allowed this type of abuse to occur. And in the case of Mark Pryor, his silence on the issue of something this important is basically tacit acceptance. So he really needs to come out strongly and demand congressional oversight in this case.
And I think we're hearing from people on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats in Washington and across the country, the frustration and the disappointment and the outrage over the Internal Revenue Service doing anything to intimidate or silence any group. Like I've said this before, whether it's the George Soros Move On liberal groups or it's the Koch brothers and conservative or a Tea Party group, the IRS has no part in getting involved in silencing or trying to prohibit any group, left or right, from obtaining a 501c3 or C4 status in order to promote their views and values. But the question is this something that Mark Pryor should weigh in more on? Should he demand some type of investigation? Should whoever's running against him, should they step forward and should they demand action or hear more from them on this situation? Candace, your thoughts on this? Should Mark Pryor do more? Is he doing what he can at this point given the information that we have?
Well, and, to speak to the fact on whoever's running against him, obviously there's not been a candidate to announce yet, and David, you may be able to provide some more insight on that than what I could, certainly. But as far as what is happening right now, I mean, clearly, again, we saw the IRS director resign yesterday, and even President Obama said that these actions are wrong, they're going to be brought to justice, and beyond that, I mean, we've got to handle the situation. It's going to take people coming together from both sides of the aisle in order to do that. So that's what I would say, moving forward needs to happen. And, just looking at the history of Arkansas and the influence of what it does on Arkansas electoral politics, look at the way that people have worked together in Arkansas to get things done. And, I'll point to the private option approval over, for the Obamacare expansion during the last legislative session is an example of bipartisan working to address an issue. And that's something that can definitely be mirrored in Washington if Republicans are willing to come to the table instead of just grabbing political headlines.
David?
Well, look, there's no doubt that Mark Pryor needs to do more on this. And it's important that, first of all, he's not said anything about Benghazi. He's not said anything about the situation with the Department of Justice and Eric Holder and the Department of Justice subpoenaing the records of phone records from the Associated Press. Now, keep in mind, he must think that Arkansans just have a really short memory, because this is the same guy that threw a downright hissy fit on the floor of the Senate and demanded the resignation of George Bush's Attorney General, Alberto Gonzales, over the charge that he lied to Pryor. Now, I don't know if he's paying attention or not, but there's a lot of people lying in Washington these days, and that's not a new thing. So, it seems that his standards for holding the executive branch accountable really basically depend on who it is that's controlling the executive branch. When we have a Republican president, he seems to be very eager to call them to task for what he sees as their improprieties. But as we're seeing now, he's just treating the Obama administration with kid gloves, and that's not acceptable.
Well, and I would disagree on a point. I think it's been reported multiple times that Senator Pryor has one of the most bipartisan and independent voices in Congress these days. I know National Journal, again, rated him as one of the most independent voices, and that is one of the things that makes him so effective as a senator, is that he's one of these few individuals that is willing to work with people from both sides of the aisles. We really need to have more of that in Washington and not just this political finger pointing that's going on.
I do want to ask this before we go to break. There are news stories across the country and political shows we've had here in Arkansas. Senator Pryor, likable politician, popular, but he's listed on in many stories as the most vulnerable senator coming up in this election. From the Arkansas Democratic Party standpoint, Candace, how will all of this that's going on in Washington impact that, his vulnerability in this race?
Well, and again, he doesn't have an opponent yet. Obviously, he had a strong showing of support through his last financial records in terms of raising money for his reelection campaign. And again, he's out there fighting for things that Arkansans care about. And, there are certainly problems and issues that are going on in Washington, but at the same time, Senator Pryor is an advocate for what is near and dear to the hearts of most Arkansans out there, and a lot of that is, still looking at the issue of jobs, and that's the reason why he was focused on agriculture this week, and that's because it's very important to Arkansans. So I would just say, again, Mark Pryor is a great advocate for the people of Arkansas, and he's going to continue to work to that end to make sure that they have good paying jobs, have access to affordable college education so that their kids can go to college, and those are the kinds of things that he'll be fighting for.
David, your thoughts on this? How will this scandals in D.C. will it affect Mark Pryor as one of the most or the most vulnerable senator in the country?
Sure. Well, we know it's going to affect him. And look, I'll say this. You know, by all accounts, Mark Pryor seems like a good person, a good guy. But the fact of the matter is that he's wrong on the message. And as the nonpartisan National Journal has pointed out, he's voted 95% of the time with Barack Obama. And sure, he can raise money, but all the money in the world doesn't fix a broken message. And he's wrong on the issues. He supported Obamacare. He supported the failed Washington stimulus. He supported the Wall Street bailouts. You know, before he decided to become a hero of the Second Amendment for election year purposes, he voted for an assault weapons ban that, had it passed, would still be in place today. He's voted numerous times for taxpayer funding of abortion, and he's flip-flopped on so many issues that his credibility is really being called into question at this point. So he's got larger problems than being able to raise money. This is going to go to his voting record, and he's going to have to defend that in 2014.
All right, we're going to take a break, but before we do, Candace, if you wanted to follow up on that before we go to break, or we'll take a break and come back.
Well, and again, we have no idea who Senator Pryor's opponent is going to be. I know people are obviously talking about it being Tom Cotton. And, you know, if you want to talk about someone who's not necessarily stood up for Arkansans, I mean, just look at his vote against the Violence Against Women Act. He wouldn't support the Republican plan even. And, you know, that's a huge issue. To deny women who are facing one of the most worst, terrible and tragic circumstances that you can ever face, and to not support, you know, relief for them. So.
Okay, so we'll have more on this specifically, I'm sure, with Mark Pryor grabbing the headlines as we move for the next few months. We're going to take a break, and then we're going to look at the overall more